Hi everyone, this is a screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin covering the area of CPA or Network Analysis for CIMA E2 for November 2014. And I'll draw your attention to question 4 of March 2011 in this respect. And what you'll see from that question on CIMA's website is that it's a 3-part requirement and just 10 marks. And what we're looking to do in the requirement A is just to draw the diagram showing the critical path and the duration. In part B, to look at the earliest time for a particular activity, in this case the recruitment campaign. And then in part C, just look at float, time, and calculate it in respect to any particular activities. Okay, so in terms of the scenario itself, I mean, the main area in scenarios or in questions like this is obviously the activity information. The bulk of the narrative is not overly helpful because it's clear from the requirement as to exactly what we need to do. We've got an individual who's looking to put together a project plan. Obviously that has a set of activities and he's going to use network analysis. So the scenario itself is not overly important. Okay. Now, in terms of the answer, what you'll see that I've done here is just really cut and pasted the detail of the question itself up here, and then really the answer, the diagram down here. Okay, so if we start off, I mean, what we have with a CPA or network analysis diagram is really a set of circles or perhaps nodes, yeah? And you'll see that they're 3-part. On the left-hand side, we have a number corresponding really with the activity as shown on the left-hand side. Now that's not overly important. I think what's important is the right-hand side of the node and really the EET as shown above and the LET, the earliest event time and latest event time. So what we're required to do really is to really fill in these little slots as we move really from sort of left to right based on the information above. Okay. Now, what we're looking to do, as they've said in the requirement, is to find what we call the critical path. And it's key that obviously you identify the critical path and obviously relay that in your answer. And you'll see that I have that cut and pasted below from the answer. Okay, so back to the detail that's provided within the question. Really, this would be the typical information. You provided a set of activities, preceding activities, and that's what tends to sort of create the problem sometimes, and also the duration here in terms of weeks. Okay, so as a starting point in this particular question, what we see is that we have activities A, B, and C, and they don't have any preceding activities at all, and obviously they have their standalone durations. So what we can see from this particular question is that our starting point is always going to be number 1, or indeed node 1, and the upper and lower EET and LET are always going to be 0 as the starting point. Okay, so if we start by drawing that out, and then we can take really any of those 3 activities, it's probably best to go from the start through A through B through C, and in this particular case that's what they do. They start with point number 1 or node 1, obviously the 0 on both upper and lower levels here, and all that they do is draw a line out with the duration in terms of weeks for activity A, and that clearly is 12. So we're getting to here first, and obviously that is node number 2. Now bear in mind our key point, our first activity, as it were, is to ensure that we get this top box right in each of the nodes as we go from left to right. So how do we do that? Well, really all that we do is we take the EET from the previous activity, i.e. 0, and we add in the duration for the activity that we've just drawn out diagrammatically. So that's 0 plus 12 equals 12. Okay? So that's really A dealt with, and it's fairly straightforward because of the fact that it doesn't have any preceding activities. When we get down a little bit lower, we're probably going to have to jump 1 or 2 just to make sure that we get things right, particularly where you see we have 2 preceding activities with 1 activity before that, and that's where things get a little bit more complicated. But for the moment, we just have A done, 12 weeks, and we have our EET here. Okay, now we move on to B, and really what we have there is no preceding activity and just simply 10 weeks in duration, and that's quite straightforward to do. We can see that B is definitely going to be number 3, given that we started on 1, A became 2, and the third node would be here for B. So what are we looking to do then? Really, all that we need to do is to put the letter and the duration being 10, and then we're looking to get this box right first. Okay, so how do we get that box right? Well, we look back to the previous activity and we say, well, if we have 10 in terms of duration, the previous one was 0, therefore that EET must be 10 weeks. Okay, so that's really A and B dealt with. We move on to C, and we see that C, again, no preceding activity at all, so we can just draw that straight out here to the 4th node, as it were. And what are we looking to do? Well, really, we're really looking to get this first EET box right. How do we do that? We look back on the previous node, yeah, the one before, and we see that in effect, if we add 0 plus 6, we get 6. So far we have, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and 1 to 4. We have our first sort of 4 nodes drawn with the EET, indeed the sort of highest time that is required available already drawn. Now that means that we've done these first 3. Now what we see as we look down the diagram is that D has an impact upon H, yeah, and we also see that E and F have an impact upon G. Now what I'm going to do is just sort of drop down to E and F. I'll explain in a moment why I'm going to do that, because what we'll see is that E and F are dependent upon A and B. Okay, so if we look at the diagram again, excuse me, we'll see that A and B are here. Okay, and what we're looking to do, let's say if we start with E, which is dependent upon A, if we start with E, we see that in the next node, node 5, we have several possibilities, because we've got E leading into it and we've also got F leading into it. Now bear in mind what we're looking for here is the highest number, yeah, the highest number that we can get. So if we draw out a line from point number 2, in effect showing E, and also draw out a line from point number 3 showing F, what we'll see is that if we add in 12, yeah, plus 9, we're going to get a 21. Yeah. Now, if we add in 10 plus 14, we're going to get 24. So if we compare E with F, the highest number that we can possibly get here is going to be based on adding in the 14 from F, and that's what we must do. We're always looking for the highest number in this EEL box. So it must be that that is 24. We can join in E and we can join in F, but this has to be 24. And remember that when we're going left to right in the first instance, we're just looking for the highest number in the EEL box, the earliest event time, as it were. Okay, so in effect, so far we have 1 to 2, 3, and 4. We now have 5, and we've chosen the 10 plus 14 for F in the EEL here. Okay, so the next thing that we look at, given the fact that we've covered A, B, C, and E and F, the next thing we look at is G. Yeah, now G you'll see that is dependent upon E and F. Okay, so if we look back to E and F, what we'll see is that G, this activity, yeah, that we've just dealt with before in terms of E and F, if we look at the possibilities for this node, yeah, you'll see that G in terms of duration is 10, and it has to happen after E and F. Yeah, you'll also notice that there's a relevance for H, D, and G, and that's why we've left this fourth one here, D. So in terms of how we can close this box off, well, really what we need to do is to say, what has happened in point number 5 or node number 5. It's dependent in effect on these items getting completed. We know that this is the highest value, so all that we're going to do is take the duration for G, which is 10, add it on to 24 to get 34 for node number 6. Okay. Now coming back to the point that I made about, coming back to the point that I made about C, what we remember is that in relation to D and C, that D was dependent upon C. Okay, and we'll also see that this final activity is really dependent upon D and G. Okay, so this one here, we have the highest entry here for 34 in effect, and what we're looking to do from there is to ensure that we've got this number right when we go back, and certainly we have if we take 26 off 34, and then really going from node number 6 to node number 7, which is H, what we'll see is that H is dependent upon D and G. Yeah, and we've done a calculation to ensure that the 34 is right, that top box is right. So really all that we're looking to do with node number 7 is just add on the duration for H, which is 6, onto this box here of 34. Okay, so 34 plus 6 equals 40. Okay, so really what we've got really so far is this sort of activities panned out. We have sort of activities or nodes 1 to 7, all the activities in there, but we don't have any underlying box here, this one. And bear in mind that the requirement has asked you to detail the critical path. And what you'll find then is that if you go back from right to left, by simply deducting and looking for the sort of lowest value, what you'll find is that if you take 40, you take off 6, you'll get 34. If you find 34, if you then take off 10, you'll get 24. If you take off 10 again from, 14 from 24, you'll get 10. And what you'll find is that the nodes where you have equal values, top and bottom, are the nodes of the critical path. Okay, and you'll see that they outline it and highlight it within this diagram. Okay, so really in terms of CPA, certainly practice is important. A couple of other issues with regard to the requirement that I'll show you below in a moment, but in essence what we're looking to do is to find the nodes where the values for EEL and LEL are the same, and you'll find that by simply adding back and going for the lowest values. If we look down the question here, you'll see that requirement B asked us to outline when a particular activity was going to start, and that was G. And what you'll see is that obviously at 24 weeks, that's the earliest point that can start, given the diagram. And in terms of float time, you'll see that float time is denoted where you have a node that has in effect unequal values. So the float time is going to happen here. We have 3 weeks in terms of float here, and obviously 2 in terms of float here, being the difference between the 6 and the 8. Okay, hopefully that's been helpful. Do practice these questions. I think that the marks will be sort of somewhere between about 4 and 5 and 7 and 8 perhaps, and I think practice is key for you. Many thanks for listening. Cheers.